Alright, hello everyone, it's silverkyle, and today I'm going to be reviewing The Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2 Omnibus from the Silver Age, which continues the run of Stan Lee as the writer and introduces John Romita Sr. as the artist, who I think did a great job replacing Steve Ditko, who was also legendary as well. Now, we're going to have two parts to this video. We're going to have one which is very minor spoilers, just kind of briefly talking about what goes on in this. And then once I change the view and we're looking at the actual artwork, that's when I'm going to go into major spoilers for this, which there's nothing really major going on in the Silver Age at this point in time. It's more so just introductions and a few story arcs here and there. But there is still some pretty big things at the very beginning here. So I very much enjoyed this. This includes The Amazing Spider-Man 39 to 67, Annuals 3 and 5, and Spectacular Spider-Man 1 and 2. The Spectacular run, like the two of them, they're black and white. They're fairly long, and I never really liked them that much. Every time that it got to that point, I was like, ugh, this is going to take a little bit longer. But the rest of the book, I very much enjoyed. And for a Silver Age story, this is definitely one of the better ones. I did enjoy Volume 1 of The Amazing Spider-Man as well. And I would say that this one edges it. They're almost identical, honestly, in my opinion. I liked them both. I do think that this one does push things a little bit further. We start getting a little bit more of two-parters, so continuing arcs instead of just a one and done. We don't get, in the first omnibus, you have sometimes half issues at the very beginning. I mean, they stopped doing that by the end of the run, but we don't get that at all in here. And we get longer runs where they do kind of continue issue to issue. We get more of what's going on with Peter Parker. We get a lot more from returning villains. So we have Dr. Octopus, Doc Ock, obviously. We got Green Goblin, a lot of going on with those two specifically. I really enjoyed those issues with Green Goblin because he's one of my favorite Spider-Man villains by far. Same thing with Doc Ock. We get some introductions of some new villains here. We do have Kingpin. We have got Rhino, which as a kid, Rhino, for some reason, I was just always attracted to the massive characters, right? So Hulk, Rhino, Juggernaut, those were all my favorites when I was a kid. And I just thought that back in the day, Rhino looking like that, I don't know, that for some reason, that just strikes fear into my heart, seeing that. And then I ended up I thought he was okay for these issues. I wasn't necessarily in love with him, but it was still nice to finally see his introduction because I had never read any of this material before. We also get, and Shocker was the other big one here. We also get a secondary Vulture, so there's two Vultures now at this point in time. The second Vulture I didn't really care for. I much preferred the original. I did find him a lot more interesting. And same thing with the Kingpin. The Kingpin, I always tied with Daredevil, but I always knew that he also came from Spider-Man at the same time, that he was one of his prominent villains. And he's the perfect crime lord that's not necessarily a super villain, although he is extremely powerful. Like, if he goes... And it's weird how strong Kingpin is, considering he has no magical abilities or superhero abilities or anything like that. I always found that very fascinating. Like, I remember in the '94 TV show, whenever he would be up against Spider-Man, I'd be like, oh, this is gonna hurt. And I would always be very nervous for Spider-Man going up against the Kingpin, because he's extremely intelligent and he's a crime lord, so he has all of these henchmen. He always has the latest tech. He's extremely powerful if he goes one-on-one. So it was just like every version of him, he's got something on Spider-Man. It was just really well done. I always very much enjoyed Kingpin. It was nice to see him finally come to life in these. We also get, minor spoiler for a side character that shows up in here, but we do get MJ finally showing up here, which is... she's kind of a negative because I don't really like her character as much right here. I assume that like later on I'll like her character a little bit more. But right now she's just kind of rather boring, but it's still nice to finally see her. We do get definitely more of Gwen. I wish we would have gotten a little bit more of Flash, because I really enjoyed him. And I always liked the dynamic of Flash absolutely despising Peter Parker, but liking Spider-Man. That to me was just a very interesting story arc that I always wanted to have more of, because it's such an interesting dynamic. And I feel that as well, we didn't get enough of that in here, and he didn't seem to hate Peter Parker as much as he did in the first volume. Those are some of the few negatives. But Green Goblin absolutely steals it. The character that the Green Goblin, like his who the Green Goblin actually is, which I won't spoil in case some people don't know. I doubt it at this point in time, but just in case, is really interesting. And what happens to Green Goblin and his alter ego, his real version of himself, is really interesting. I can't really spoil it because I don't want to get into that right now, but I just want to say, so I think we're just going to flip it over so I can start talking about things a little bit more freely here. I very much enjoyed this for a Silver Age book. You are going to be getting a lot of word bubbles. You're going to get a lot of descriptions from Stan Lee explaining exactly what's happening as if you were a 5-year-old child. And you have to think of that. It's the 60s here. It's still the early 60s. We are still, this is still more geared towards kids or early teens, basically. So you're getting a lot of dialogue that is very plain to a degree. You're not getting these over crazy arcs, but we're starting to get a little bit more interesting than Volume 1. And I definitely recommend it if you're a Spidey fan and if you want to see the introductions to a lot of these characters and you're okay with a little bit longer Silver Age dialogue from Stan Lee. So now let's dive into some bigger spoilers so we can talk a little bit more about the book itself. So now we can dive a little bit more into the major spoilers of this book now that we're looking at the actual artwork. But like I said earlier, there's nothing really major in this other than, you know, the cover, which is Green Goblin finally finds out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And that happens right in this first issue. It's a really great start to this run where Spider-Man takes out some villains. He changes back into as Peter Parker, and his spider sense is kind of going off. And it's because of the Green Goblin is trailing him, but he has no idea that he's actually following him. And he follows him home. They have a battle. And I always liked Peter Parker fighting without his suit because it's dire straits at that point. Whoever he's fighting knows who he is. And so he just has to go out and try to beat them as fast as possible. And the other big thing at the very end of the issue is we finally find out that the Green Goblin is Norman Osborn. I would have loved to have been a kid back in the 60s reading this for the first time. Like, that to me would have just been such a big revelation. If you're like a 10-year-old, oh man, that would have been so awesome. Because I feel even when I found out through the TV show and I loved it. It was awesome. So then what happens is that they have this all-out war. The first few issues are just great here, especially this one. And what happens is that when Spider-Man finally defeats him, Norman ends up getting like some kind of amnesia, and he doesn't remember that he was Green Goblin. He thinks Green Goblin is a completely different person. And so he saves him, and Norman is just back to normal as a normal person. And they kind of play this throughout this entire omnibus. And I really liked that arc where you're going to get later on that Norman is always wondering who the Green Goblin was and why he has these feelings about the Green Goblin. Same thing with Spider-Man. Like, he just doesn't understand a lot of why he has certain memories, but they're not making sense to him just yet. We got the Rhino here, and I would have absolutely loved this as a kid. Like, that suit, this massive strong guy that's getting bullets ricocheting off of him, I would have loved that. But I didn't really like it. I didn't enjoy it as much when I was reading it myself for the first time. It was just okay. We get a lot more of Gwen Stacy in this. Also, just the way they drew Gwen back then. She looks like an absolute Hollywood blonde actress from back then. Like, the art's actually very impressive, in my opinion. It very much is from this period. Even the way that a lot of the guys look. I really do appreciate. I used to hate this kind of art. I was like, it's so plain. When I was a kid, I was like, I don't understand how kids would have enjoyed this, but I love it now. I can appreciate it so much more as an adult here. I think that's Jameson's son. And we finally get the introduction of MJ. But like I said, I really didn't like her character as much in this one. I was much more of a Gwen fan, which I never thought I would be as I read this. Also, she looks absolutely incredible as well. Just trying to see if there's anything else There's an Avengers issue, I think, where he wants to see if he can join the Avengers. And I liked this because they wanted to prove that Spider-Man could join him, or could join them. And so what they had to do is they had to go through like this trial where he would have to, I think, go up against every one of them to see if he should actually be in with them. And he's like, that doesn't seem like something I would like to be part of. And that's very Spider-Man-like. So this was a very Spider-Man-like issue when the Avengers, when he wants to see if he's going to be joining the Avengers. So I did enjoy that. Lizard I like, but not really. He was just okay. I didn't like him. I like him later on, and I like the art that happens, but right now he just looks weird. It just, his eyes are just freaky, and I mean, I guess that's the point, really, but I just never really enjoyed it that much. Shocker, we get the introduction of Shocker here. I was always a pretty big fan of Shocker, and we kind of see that he's just a regular criminal that ended up getting this crazy awesome suit. Became the Shocker. We get a lot more of Peter Parker, Gwen Stacy, Harry Osborn, MJ. We get a lot more of Peter's life here instead of Spider-Man, which I always enjoyed. Here's the other Vulture, who I didn't really enjoy. Kraven I loved in the first Omnibus. Didn't like him necessarily as much in this one. He didn't have that same, like an issue that he faces Kraven for the first time in Volume 1. It just seems like that was one of the hardest battles he had ever had. And I loved it. He really had to dig deep to face him. We get some more of Mysterio. It was okay. It wasn't the biggest fan. I do like the Spider-Man and Torch. They seem to team up quite a bit, and they're friends, so I liked that. This was weird, though. They go to like a movie set. I think something like, or is this Mysterio? This is all Mysterio, but are they at a movie set? Maybe I'm confusing some issues here. Doc Ock's stuff is great. His return was awesome. I've always liked Doc Ock. He's one of my favorites. I don't know if I prefer Doc Ock or Green Goblin. It's one or the other as my favorite Spider-Man villains. And we'll just go to the end here, but we get Kingpin as well. Kingpin had some awesome issues that I really enjoyed. These are what, the Inhumans, I believe. I was okay with that. This one's really good with Captain Stacy, so Gwen's father, and he doesn't really trust Pete. Like he's actually a pretty big character, and I did not know that. Okay, here's Spectacular Spider-Man. I don't like necessarily the art that's going on here. Who drew this? It's just, it's not my fave. It's still Romita. It just seems a little bit different. Maybe it's just because, maybe it's, I'm trying to see if there's a different ink here. No. I don't know why it seems different to me, but it does. It's maybe just that they don't have the color. I mean, that still looks like MJ. That still looks like J. Jonah. Like a Frankenstein monster. I don't care. I just did not like this. I don't know if other people really enjoyed it, but I didn't. Oh, and obviously the Spider's Web. Whenever they have the letters, that's always really fun to read. Is that MJ? Just want to. There's another battle. Eventually, Norman does succumb to realizing who he is. He comes back as the Green Goblin. They fight again. It's interesting stuff. I'm very much looking forward to Volume 3. And they kind of battle it out. I do not like MJ's hair. Also, Aunt May, I've never really been a fan of it. I get the point of Aunt May, but she's just always worrying about Peter, and it's too much. Like, it's the same, it's almost verbatim the same thing over and over every time. It's not my fave. But either way, that is Volume 2 of The Amazing Spider-Man. I definitely recommend it if you're a fan of Silver Age stuff, and if you're a fan of The Amazing Spider-Man, I don't think you can go wrong with this. It's probably one of the better Silver Age runs. Thank you all for watching. You've been bearded in Beardage.